Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much and welcome. I'm Father Mitch Packle. Welcome to Threshold of Hope, where we take a look at the writings of the Church. And we are going through an encyclical by Pope St. John Paul II. And it's called Veritatis Splendor. Veritatis Splendor. You can get a paperback copy of this by going to EWTN's Religious Catalog. Online, it's EWTNRC.com, or you can call their 800 number, 1-800-854-6316. If you prefer, you can download a free electronic copy of Veritatis Splendor by going to the document library of our website, EWTN.com, and download it into your computer and print it out or read from the computer. Now, of course, we love to get you involved and participate in the show. You can do like these nice folks have done, coming here all the way from New York City, right here to beautiful Irondale, Alabama, next door to Birmingham. Or you can send a question by email by writing to threshold@EWTN.com. Or if you wish, you can call during the live broadcast, which is on Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And the phone number is 1-800-221-9460. 1-800-221-9460. Or if you are outside North America or inside Birmingham, you can call 205-271-2980. Right. Last week, we ended up at paragraph 90, in which the Pope was talking about the role of how martyrdom shows a key element of our commitment to our morality and our faith. And he continues on here in paragraph 91, saying that in the Old Testament, we already find admirable witnesses of fidelity to the holy law of God, even to the point of voluntary acceptance of death. There are people who so love the law of God, they'd rather be executed than break the law. A prime example is the story of Susanna, which is found in the book of Daniel, chapter 13. A lot of Protestant Bibles don't have that chapter. It was in the Greek translation of Daniel, and the Catholics have used it and continue to use it. And she had been taking a bath, and two unjust judges saw her and lusted after her. And they came into her garden and said, if you don't have illicit relations with us, if you don't commit adultery, then we will cry out and accuse you of committing adultery with somebody else. So give in to us and you'll be okay. But if you don't give in to us, we'll accuse you of adultery with some young man, and then you'll still end up getting stoned to death for that. And here's how she replies. In Daniel 13, verses 22 and following. Susanna sighed deeply and said, I am hemmed in on every side. For if I do this thing, it is death for me. And if I do not, I shall not escape your hands. I choose not to do it and to fall into your hands rather than to sin in the sight of the Lord. So she thinks that she might be able to save her life if she commits adultery with these two men, but she says, no, I'd rather keep the law of God and not commit adultery than sin. She prefers to fall innocent into the hands of the judges. And she bears witness not only to her faith and trust in God, but also to her obedience to the truth. and also to the absoluteness of the moral order. There's a famous case in Roman history where a married woman was back at home, her husband was off at war, and his friend, the three friends said, let's go see if our wives are cheating on us. So they went home, and they were not, and this one woman in particular. But then one of the men, a so-called friend of her husband, said, sleep with me or else I'll scream and say you were doing somebody else. Same problem. She gave in to him. She gave in to his ways, and he forced himself. He raped her. And she then killed herself as witness. I didn't want to, but he made me. So she ended up dying anyway, and she did something that was sinful. And these are these impossible moral situations that sometimes very evil people can put us into. And this is something that we have to be alert to. Susanna was ready to die as a martyr. And she proclaimed that it was not right to do what God's law qualifies as evil. Adultery is always and everywhere an evil, even when forced. And she chose for herself the better part. She didn't try to draw some good from the act of adultery. No, she would be chaste within the proper chastity due to marriage. And she did not compromise her morals. She didn't compromise the truth about what is good. And she didn't compromise her fidelity to the God of Israel. She revealed the holiness of God. And for that reason, God sent Daniel, a young boy, to show that this was false. And he separated the two unjust judges. And he asked one, under which tree was she when you saw her? And he said, one tree, that means a very large tree. And then he asked the other one, under what tree did you see her? He mentioned a tree that's just a little bush. So it became absolutely clear to everyone they were lying, and they were executed, not Susanna. So she didn't get executed. God saved her. But then we also see at the dawn of the New Testament, John the Baptist. He was unable to refrain from speaking about the moral law of God. And he rejected any compromise with evil. And as it says in the Roman Missal, in the prayer for the feast of the beheading of John the Baptist on August 29th, just celebrated that a week ago, it says, O God, who willed that St. John the Baptist should go ahead of your Son both in his birth and in his death, grant that as he died a martyr for truth and justice, we too may fight hard for the confession of what you teach, so that he becomes a model. And if you recall that he was arrested because of his preaching, and his preaching was about the repent from sin and turn to God and believe. That was his basic message. He got arrested for that by Herod. And then he continued criticizing Herod. Why? Because Herod had taken his sister-in-law, his brother's wife, to be his own wife. And something that the gospel does not mention is that his sister-in-law also happened to be his niece. And it was his grandniece, Salome, who did her famous dance. And he said, I'll give you anything you want up to half my kingdom. And she wanted the head of John the Baptist. John the Baptist died for the sake of the integrity of marriage. Susanna died because she wouldn't commit adultery. Or no, she didn't die for that, but she almost was executed for allegedly committing adultery, which she hadn't done. John the Baptist had his head cut off because he said that inauthentic marriage between a man and his sister-in-law / niece, as well as lust for his grandniece, these were sins. And it's interesting, St. John Fisher, who was the Bishop of Rochester, England, at the time of Henry VIII, Bishop St. John Fisher defended Catherine of Aragon, the first wife of King Henry VIII. And he said John the Baptist stood up in favor of marriage even before Christ had died on the cross and redeemed us. So for the Old Testament dispensation and understanding of marriage, he was willing to die for Christ. That shows how important marriage is, and divorce is not permitted. And of course, I believe, was it Jane Seymour was the woman that Henry had taken up with. She was furious that the comparison was clearly made between Herodias and Jane Seymour, and so she also had St. John Fisher's head cut off, like John the Baptist. So that played out. It's not something that happened just once in history. It's something that goes on. So that we see that St. John is the forerunner of the Messiah in every way, including in his death, as we saw in the prayer. And we see in Mark chapter 6, verse 17 to 29, which tells the story of the death of John the Baptist. And we see also that St. Bede the Venerable, in his homilies on the Gospels, said in Book 2, paragraph 23, "The one who came to bear witness to the light, and who deserved to be called by that same light which is Christ, a burning and shining lamp, was cast into the darkness of prison. The one to whom it was granted to baptize the Redeemer of the world was thus baptized in his own blood." He gives a witness of martyrdom for this, for the sake of the gospel. And by the way, I've been to the place where he was killed. You see the Jewish historian Josephus mention that Herod killed John at the fortress Machaerus. Today it's in the kingdom of Jordan, and it's called Makawar. Makawar, if you get a hold of the video series we did on Christian pilgrimage to Jordan, you can see video about that place. But he's not the only one who has died. We see that in the rest of the New Testament, the followers of Jesus Christ, beginning with the deacon, Stephen, he's called the archdeacon, the first deacon, the beginning of the deacons, he died. Why? Because he was debating people in Jerusalem about the faith, and they couldn't answer him. They couldn't answer him, had no response. And because they couldn't answer him, they killed him for his witness about Christ. See that in Acts chapter 6, verse 8, all the way to chapter 7, verse 60. Chapter 7 about his trial is the longest chapter in Acts. That's how important that was. The Apostle James, the brother of John the Apostle, also was martyred, as we see in Acts chapter 12, verses 1 to 2, when Herod Agrippa I, arrested him. Not the Herod that killed John the Baptist, but his nephew, one of his nephews, that he laid violent hands upon some who belonged to the church, and he killed James, the brother of John. You see that in Acts chapter 12. Though he died himself soon after killing Saint James. We also see that they followed the Lord Jesus, who, as Paul wrote to Timothy in chapter 6, verse 13, said, "In the presence of God who gives life to all things, and of Christ Jesus, who in his testimony before Pontius Pilate made the good confession." So Jesus didn't say, "Oh, no, I'm not the Messiah. You got somebody else." No, Christ said, "I am he," when he was on trial before Pilate or before the Sanhedrin or before Herod. And Jesus confirmed the truth of his message at the cost of his life. Jesus shows the great witness of dying for what he preached. Countless other martyrs accepted persecution and death rather than perform the idolatrous act of burning incense before a statue of the emperor. We see this in Revelation chapter 13, made reference to, beginning with verse 7. Also was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. And authority was given it over every tribe and people and tongue and nation, and all who dwell on earth will worship the beast. Everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of the life of the Lamb who is slain. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is to be taken captive, to captivity he goes. If anyone slays with the sword must he be slain. Here's a call for endurance and faith of the saints. And that has been a clarion call throughout the history of the church. Throughout the whole history of the church, I don't know that the Pope knew at the time, but according to John Allen, in his book on martyrdom that came out last year, 75 million Christians have been killed for their faith. 75 million. And again, I keep reminding you, there'll be those who say, yeah, but the church caused more wars and persecutions against other people. That's not true. It's simply untrue. The number of people who died in Christian wars and persecutions done by the church, like the Inquisition and such, the number is 2.65 million over the last 2,000 years. 2.65 million, whereas the number of martyrs committed by other people is 75 million. That's a big gap, isn't it? Religion is not the biggest cause of war. And of the 75 million, 40 million died in the 1900s, in the last century. 40, that's more than half of all martyrs in the history of the church were killed in the last 100 years. Next year, I believe, we'll be celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Russian Revolution and the Bolshevik Revolution. And they were, the communists and atheists were by far the most vicious killers of martyrdom, especially in Eastern Europe. So this is something that we see how Christians refused to even pretend to feign worshiping the Emperor of Rome. And they gave examples of their duty to do what God asked. We can't worship anybody but God. So they gave that not even a single concrete act would get them to go against God's commandment. So they wouldn't offer incense to the emperor. And like Jesus Christ himself, they obediently trusted and handed their lives over to the Father, the one who could free them from death, as Hebrews chapter 5, verse 7 brings out. In the days of his flesh, Jesus offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears to him who was able to save him from death, and he was heard for his godly fear. The martyrs pray. It's one of the amazing things to hear the stories of martyrs. I actually met a priest. He was an American Jesuit who was in a communist prison camp in the 1950s as a missionary. And how he would be ordered to sit in his cell for hours every day alone. What would he do? He would pray. He would recite the words of Mass that he'd memorized, and he would say the rosary, all 15 decades. The communists just saw him being quiet. He was praying, and when his mother was able to sneak some hosts and wine, he would celebrate Mass. And this is, you hear story after story in the Nazi concentration camps, in atheistic communist concentration camps, people prayed as did Jesus in the agony in the garden, so have Christians done, and gave themselves up to death. The church proposes the example of numerous saints who bore witness to and defended the moral truth, even to the point of enduring martyrdom. This is the model we set before us. They even preferred death to committing a single mortal sin. There's a Chinese saint, his first name is Matthew, who was a drug addict. He's now the patron saint of drug addicts. He was addicted to opium, but when the boxers in the Boxer Rebellion, said to him, leave Christianity and you'll live, he wouldn't do it. He said, I can't stop, using drugs, I'm addicted, but I won't give up Christ. And he died a martyr, even in his addictive state. When the church raises these martyrs to the honor of the altar by recognizing them as saints, the church has canonized their witness and declared the truth of their judgment, according to which the love of God entails the obligation to respect his commandments. Even in the most dire circumstances, we respect God's commandments and we refuse to disobey those commandments. We won't betray them, even for the sake of saving one's life. We won't do it. And this is something where we see many of you who are active in protesting for life know the nasty things that get said to you. I've seen such things go on, but we do it because we cherish life. And this is a type of witness or martyrdom as well. Paragraph 92 continues. Martyrdom is an affirmation of the inviolability of the moral order. So it affirms that you cannot violate the moral order. It's not up for grabs. Rather, martyrdom bears a splendid witness both to the holiness of God's law. God's law is so good and holy, it's worth giving your life for, as well as a witness to the inviolability of the dignity of the human person, so that we respect the human person who is created in God's image and likeness, and we respect the holiness of God's law. This human dignity, based on the image and likeness of God, may never be disparaged or called into question. You can't say, well, this person is not viable, they're expendable. No, they're not. Well, what if they have disabilities? Then let them teach us how to love them, because they will make us better people. If we kill them, we will be the ones who lose, not they. They'll end up in heaven, no doubt. But we are the ones who are violated as we try to violate their dignity. Even when people have a good intention or various difficulties involved, as such as taking care of a child who has various disabilities, our Lord lays a challenge before us in Mark 8, verse 36. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his life? And the word in Greek is psyche, soul. You can lose your immortal soul by going against God and his commandments. Martyrdom rejects as false and illusory whatever, quote, human meaning might claim to attribute, even in exceptional conditions, to an act morally evil in itself. So, give an example. What do people call killing somebody who is old or sick? Euthanasia, right? And that means happy death. That's what it means in Greek. And even that's a little harsh, a little abstract. So we'll call it mercy killing. These are people who would say, well, we're trying to be merciful. But they identify mercy in terms of killing, and they make an alliance with death, who is God's enemy and Satan's friend. If you make an alliance with death, you make an alliance with Satan, and you make enmity with God until you repent. Indeed, it even more clearly unmasks the true faith of such an act, that this is a violation of man's humanity, that what it means to be a human being is violated by committing a sin against God's law. In a violation of humanity in the one perpetrating it, even before it affects the one who endures it. That's why we see in Gaudium et Spes, the Constitution on the Church in the Modern World, paragraph 27. Furthermore, whatever is opposed to life itself, such as any type of murder, genocide, abortion, euthanasia, or willful self-destruction, that is suicide, whatever violates the integrity of the human person, such as mutilation of people, as in torture, torments inflicted on body or mind, attempts to coerce the will itself through torment and torture, whatever insults human dignity, such as subhuman living conditions, arbitrary imprisonment, deportation, slavery, prostitution, the selling of women and children, which is worse now than it ever was, as well as disgraceful working conditions, where men are treated as mere tools for profit rather than as free and responsible persons. All these things and others of their like are infamies indeed. They poison human society, but they do more harm to those who practice them than those who suffer from the injury. Moreover, they are supreme dishonor to the Creator. This is something that our politicians must be very alert to, because on both sides of the aisle, there are people who support such things or ignore them. And it's at both sides. And we, as Catholics, must stand up to our parties, our candidates, etc., and tell them that if something is an attack on human dignity and God's moral law, it is wrong, and you are wrong for supporting it or allowing it, on both sides. Not one side, all sides. So, in this way, martyrdom is the exaltation of a person's perfect humanity and of true life, as attested by St. Ignatius of Antioch, when he addressed the Christians of Rome in his letter to the Romans, chapter 6, verse 2 and 3, where he says, "Have mercy on me, brethren. Do not hold me back from living. Do not wish that I die. Let me arrive at the pure light. Once there, I will truly be a man, and let me imitate the passion of my God." Notice that. In saying that, let me imitate the passion of my God, he's recognizing Jesus as God. This is a letter written in 107. And that we are to imitate the passion of Christ, the way St. Stephen did, St. James, St. John the Baptist, and so many 75 million other martyrs. And that the martyrdom is going on today. Men, women, and children are being crucified, burned alive, and otherwise attacked in Iraq and elsewhere in Africa. They're being put into slavery. And these people who do, these terrorists and radicals who do such things, think that they will go to heaven? They think they will see God in paradise? No. They will go to the place of judgment. If they don't repent, they will end up in hell, as will anybody who supports such attacks. No, we seek instead the truth of God's law, and we agree with St. Ignatius that once we do arrive in heaven for being faithful to God's law, there we'll be truly human. All right, we'll take a break. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes. We're going to get your questions and comments, as well as those of our studio audience, so please stay with us. Thank you. Now, before we go to our questions and phone calls, I hope everyone was able to watch EWTN's coverage of Mother St. Teresa of Calcutta's canonization over the weekend. Now we can call her Saint Teresa of Calcutta. And joining us now by phone to briefly discuss Mother St. Teresa's canonization and some of the reasons behind the criticism of her work and of her is the author of a new book, Unmasking Mother Teresa's Critics. Please welcome the president of the Catholic Lead, and a good friend of mine is Mr. Bill Donahue. Mr. Bill, are you there?
Yes, I am, and thank you so much, Father Mitch. I love you, buddy.
Oh, thanks. It's great to have you on here, because I read your book. It arrived, and I read it on just the day after I got it, and I've been alert to this. It seems so odd that there are people comparing Mother St. Teresa to, calling her the wickedest person of the 20th century. And my first reaction was, wow, with competition like Adolf Hitler, Mao Zedong, and Joseph Stalin, and Pol Pot, she won the prize. What's going on with this?
Well, the people who've been after her, and obviously there's only a few, but they get a lot of play in the media.
Yeah.
Particularly the guy who I used to fight with all the time, the late British author Christopher Hitchens. But in every one of these cases, they are either militant atheist or radical socialist or both. The militant atheism in them, of course, can't stand the idea of a diminutive nun having outreach to the poor and showing her altruism. That's too much for these people to bear. And in the case of the radical socialist element, well, they see the job of government is the proper role for government to take care of the poor. They object to people like Mother Teresa because she is regarded as an obstacle, as a deterrent to the proper role of the state, as if the government's done a magnificent job with the poor. So you put them together, and by the way, they're fundamentally irrational. In some cases, they're out-and-out liars, and I've been able to demonstrate that in the book, not people who just make a mistake. And their animus is palpable, but they can be knocked down quite quickly. But I think it needed to be done. I think I wanted people to say, in one volume, I know where to go to dispel all these myths about this great woman, St. Teresa of Calcutta.
And, one of the great things is because they don't really have much to base their criticism on. And it's just false accusations regularly and innuendo, say allegedly that she's a virgin and things like that, and just nastiness. And you didn't need a big book to do that. You took care of it quickly. And if you hear criticisms of Mother Teresa, I highly recommend Bill's book. It was very carefully done, and he's got the data.
Well, I mean, that's just the difference there between Hitchens and me. As I told Christopher to his face many times, that if he were a student of mine and he put together a 98-page book taking on Mother Teresa, and he has no endnotes, no footnotes, no bibliography, no citations, no attribution of any kind, I'd have to give him an F. I've got more footnotes than I have pages in the book.
Yep. And, we are making Bill's book, which is called Unmasking Mother Teresa's Critics. You can get it at EWTN Religious Catalog, EWTNRC.com, or you can call 1-800-854-6316. It's item number 3758. So, and sort of confirming this too, the point you made about what's going on. I was down in New Orleans and the Baton Rouge area in southern Louisiana, and I was very impressed by a number of things, talking to people who lost everything or some stuff, in businesses, sometimes their homes. And if you remember, just before the flood in Baton Rouge, there was a lot of racial tension. Some man had come from St. Louis and allegedly murdered a number of policemen down there. And all this turmoil is going on. Black Lives Matter's there, the Black Panthers are there. But I watched a video, a self-video by an African-American gentleman who said, where's Black Lives Matter when we need them in the flood? Where's the Black Panthers when we need them? White people are helping us. The police are helping us. And, and it was also, talking to other people besides him, it was black people helping white people helping black people. It didn't matter. They were people helping folks in need. And the government, it takes them a while to get motivated, or not motivated, but to get mobilized, is the word I'm looking for. It takes a while for government. Government's big. But the people on the ground were doing the cooking and they're living out the way Mother Teresa did. And so this is what all of us are called to do. Bill, thanks a lot for being with us.
Thank you, and keep up the great work. You're the best.
All right. You do the same. Keep up that research. I love it.
Thank you.
All right. Now let's go to a call. We have James on the line. James, where are you calling from?
Erie, Pennsylvania.
Aren't you something? Good to have you on. And
Thank you.
What is your question or comment?
Well, in view of the national elections coming up in 2 months, which isn't just president, there's Senate and other kinds of elections.
Right.
Shouldn't all Catholics be? I mean, there's only 2 months left. Shouldn't we all promoting, the basic teaching that we need to have the legal protection of the right to life of all human beings from conception? Right. The most big, and this is just a teaching of St. John Paul II and St. Teresa of Calcutta. It's the most basic and fundamental right. Well, there's other rights and goods, but to quote St. John Paul II, he said the right to life should be defended with maximum determination. So that's my prayer, and we all should be promoting, but I'm not hearing much of it.
James, you are absolutely correct. If you kill a baby in the womb, or someone who is sick later on, or someone who's at the end of life, they can't have any other rights. They don't get any other rights. They're dead. So life has to have a priority along then with other issues. That's why I made it clear when we quoted from Gaudium et Spes that other issues such as suicide, we have to work to stop that as a life issue, and help the people who are depressed or whatever other problem they're going through. We have to do what we can to stop human trafficking. And we have to do what we can to make sure that working conditions are good. And in this country, there's huge steps forward over practically any other country. Europe and America have made great advances in the working conditions and such. But we always have to be alert to that. And many other issues must be addressed. The economy is important. But if you're dead, you don't get to enjoy the economy. Unless, of course, you act or go along with the thought of Nancy Pelosi, the representative from California, who said we must include abortion and birth control. Think of all the money we'll save. If she wants to put saving money for the government ahead of life, she'll have to answer to God for that, not to mention to the dead children. We cannot put economics ahead of the life of anybody so that they too can live and enjoy the economy if we let them live. That's key. So James, keep encouraging folks where you live to do that. I have an email here from Eris. Dear Father Mitch, God gave everyone the freedom of choice. Is it our place to take someone's freedom of choice away? Would it not be better to educate the people that abortion is murder and then let them decide? Would it not be better to change the laws to treat those that murder anyone unborn and born in the same way? God could have forced us all to obey him, but he didn't. Jesus gave us the second greatest commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. Condoning someone preaching hate, not love of neighbor, is encouraging people to sin and hurt God. Eris. Well, Eris, first of all, condoning someone preaching hate. Who's preaching hate? Ku Klux Klan. But, keep in mind that for many years now, the Democratic Party has long rejected their former membership or partaking of Ku Klux Klan. That kind of hatred is not preached by the Democratic Party anymore. They've rejected that, and they've rejected the Klan staunchly. So that's something that I don't know who's preaching hate. I hope nobody is. And the Klan has gotten pretty small. It's not that big an issue. That is something that we have to avoid. And if somebody does preach hate, then we have to stand up to them, but make sure they're preaching hate. One of the problems that we have today is that a lot of people identify those who disagree with them as haters when they don't really hate you. There's not hate, but this is something that we have to keep in mind. Then secondly, God gave everyone freedom of choice. Is that a place to take someone's freedom of choice away? How are we taking their freedom of choice away? When we make it a crime to steal, are we taking their choice away? They still can steal, but it will be a crime that gets prosecuted under the law. They have their freedom to obey the law, thou shalt not steal. And under the state, the state jurisdiction recognizes stealing people's property or destroying people's property is a crime. Or thou shalt not murder. People who are born, children, adults, and so on, the church says thou shalt not kill, but the state also says you may not kill. Now, does that take away people's choice? Apparently not. So horrendously, in my hometown of Chicago, there are a lot of people who choose to kill, and new record numbers. But it is the obligation of the state to make sure that the consequences of committing murder are put to the person. One reason is to keep them away from doing it again. And the same thing would be with, I hear, whom do we punish if abortion gets to be illegal? I would say the doctors. They're the perpetrators in most ways. So, and why would you put them in jail? Do I have freedom of choice? Well, yeah, they have freedom of choice. But if they go to jail, then they can't do it again. That would be where the criminality comes in. And this would be something that lawyers have to figure out the best way. But, you're not taking away somebody's freedom of choice. You're just letting them know that when you criminalize criminal behavior, there are consequences you have to undergo as a result of being a criminal. Okay? And so this is something that we have to deal with. And God doesn't force us to obey him, but if you don't obey him, you'll go to hell. That's fairly basic. Now you have a freedom to go to hell, but it's as a consequence of your choice to disobey. But there are consequences, and so you have freedom, but evil actions always have consequences, and that's something that applies in civil law as well as, of course, in God's judgment. Okay, Let's take a call. We have Kathy on the line. Hello, Kathy.
Hello, Father.
How are you? What's your question?
I have frustration.
Huh.
I'm in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, 2 to 16, and then again in the 14th chapter, also in 1 Timothy 2, verse 9 through 15.
Yeah.
We have issues of women covering their heads. They should be quiet in church. A woman should not teach if a man is in the class.
And what's your frustration with this precisely?
Were these St. Paul's ideas, or do we need to act upon those? I don't wear a veil at Mass, and I have spoken. I have also taught, and I'm not sure
what to do with that.
What are we supposed to do with these?
Okay. Couple things. Especially in Corinthians. Have you read the whole of Corinthians?
No, just this chapter.
Oh,
11.
well, first of all, you need to read your whole Bible.
Okay.
So don't you go reading parts now. But
right.
one of the reasons to take a look at it, you see that Corinth was a city known for its sexual immorality. In fact, archaeologists point out, historians point out, that the looser, there were prostitutes who worked at the local temple of the pagan gods. They would carve into their sandal, the soles of their sandals, they would carve backwards the words, "Follow me." And they would walk from the shore where the sailors landed over to the house of ill repute. Okay? And this is something that, they were very infamous for. In fact, calling somebody, "You Corinthian," was the same as saying, "You are a sexual reprobate." Now, in the ancient world, as we see very much today in the Middle East, wearing a veil was a way to show modesty and that a woman belongs to not just polite society, but to moral society, okay? That she was part of that. And to not wear a veil was a way to indicate you were a loose woman. That was how you showed. Now, today, people, there are certain ways that prostitutes still indicate that they are prostitutes by the way they dress. They don't dress modestly. And that's what not wearing a veil signaled in the ancient world. So for that reason, the church made it an option to wear a veil or hat or not. As my mother pointed out, she was concerned that, well, it's good to wear a veil or something. She didn't mind that, but wearing hats became an occasion of showing off, and that's not the idea of it. It's a sign of modesty. So the church left it up to the local cultures, where in some places that is very much part of the culture, other places it's not. It was, in other words, it is understood as something part of the culture. And this is, St. Paul was addressing an important issue in his day. But, we also see that the meaning of veils is different today than it once was. Though, I would point out too, that the orders of nuns who wear the veil and the habit are the ones that are growing, while those that eschew those are not. But, because it does give a public witness. So that's how the church has dealt with that. And the same with, teaching. It doesn't have the same aspect that it did in first century Greece that it does today. And so, of course, the church allows women to teach. So that's where that's coming from. Okay. All right, let's now go over to Nancy. Hello, Nancy.
Hi.
Well, how are you? Where are you calling from so cheerily?
I'm doing great. I'm calling from God's country in Kansas.
Huh. Yeah, that's sort of God's corn country now.
Well,
And wheat.
Yeah. I have two questions, actually.
Yes, ma'am.
One question is about DNR. Do not resuscitate. Is
Yes.
that considered a form of murder?
No. Here's why. There is a difference between taking away somebody's life by positively killing them versus in the do not resuscitate, or that if somebody dies, you don't have to resuscitate. Their body is dying. You're not killing them. For instance, you're not withholding food or
Okay.
what do you call it? Water. You are, like my grandfather had 17 strokes in a row, and they kept on resuscitating him. And he was 95 years old, and his body was just done. And they said, you don't need to do that, because that's extraordinary. And it didn't last. His body couldn't sustain the resuscitation. So
Right.
that's something that is not the same as murder at all. But if
Okay.
you do something to actually kill the person, that's different. That would be murder. So what's your other question?
The other question is in voting. When both candidates go against what God teaches, how do you vote?
Okay.
Or do you?
Yeah. Here's what you have to do. You have to take a look at the policies of each candidate and pay attention to which, what are the things where they break God's commandments? That's, see this, again, I've been saying this a number of weeks now. The three issues are the commandments of God are a bottom line below which they should not go. So do their programs and their policies, or as they call them, the party platforms, do they promote life and the other commandments, or do they attack them? And there's also you have to pay attention. Do they attack the commandments, or do they just not make them an issue? That's a different issue too. If someone is actively promoting abortion, for instance, as James said earlier, you have to say, no, I cannot support any form of murder of innocent people, unborn or not. But if they just don't say anything about it, then, well, you have to assume the best, unless they give an indication otherwise. And the same thing with their other policies. Are there policies against the commandments? Secondly, you look for their ability to live out the virtues. Are they virtuous people? Are they good? And this is one of the things that people have a lot of problems with both candidates. How good are they at keeping their word, at telling the truth, swearing under oath in testimony and things? These questions must be addressed along with their prudence, their temperance, their ability to use self-control, their focus, their ability to be just toward others. Do they demonstrate justice? Not just talk about it. That's not policy platform. Do they demonstrate justice, especially to those who are below them in status? These are the kinds of questions. Do they show courage to stand up for what's right? That's the virtues. And there's no limit to how high the virtues can go. But we need to examine all the candidates, presidential and down. Then the third issue is wisdom. Do they know what they're talking about? Do they have the wisdom to do the job? The ability to grow and understand? I mean, neither of them, unless they're incumbents, they haven't done the job of being what they're elected to. But the ability to learn it. Those are the criteria. And we have to do that carefully. And don't listen to the press. Don't listen to the press. Analyze the party platforms yourself and what the candidates actually say. The press tend not to tell the truth. All right. Lord bless you and keep you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And again, remember to keep us in between your gas bill, your electric bill, and cable bill. And we'll pay all of our bills too. Thank you, and God bless.